Alright guys, in the next 5 minutes my goal is to go through two quadratic equations, solving using the quadratic formula. Of course these could be finding x-intercepts, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but it could be. And of course in this situation we're going to be looking at giving the answer in exact form. That means we're not going to be able to use our calculator to punch in the square root to get a decimal answer because the decimal answers are generally approximated. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it in exact form, which means as a simplified radical and then a simplified fraction. So let's just go ahead with this first one. We're going to say a equals 1, b equals -4, and c equals -1. And so we're going to go x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you should be familiar with the quadratic formula by now. So now we just go x equals negative b, which was -4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -4 squared, minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now from this point you should be able to simplify. Most of you are fairly comfortable with that. The place where most people I usually see make a mistake is right here. So I've got a -4 times 1, which will give me -4, and then I'll multiply that -4 from putting those two together times the -1, which will be a +4, which means I'm going to write plus 4. I've already used that minus as a negative for the -4, so there's no minus here anymore. The negative times the negative ended up giving me a positive. And then on the bottom I've got over 2. So here now we've got x equals 4 plus or minus square root of 20 over 2. Now this is where it's going to change from what we've done in the past. In the past, at this point, you then just plugged it into your calculator, got the decimal answer. We're not going to be doing that now because we want it to stay exact, so we don't want the approximated decimal. So therefore we're just going to simplify the square root of 20. So if I simplify the square root of 20, that is the square root of 4 times 5, and so that's the square root of 4 times the square root of 5, which is 2 times the square root of 5. And so square root of 20 is 2 root 5, so we're going to rewrite this as x equals 4 plus or minus 2 root 5. This is now a simplified radical because inside the square root there's not a fraction, there's no perfect squares inside there, there's no radicals on the bottom. So therefore, as far as the radicals goes, this is simplified. It's not simplified as far as the fraction though, because I can still reduce these. Now the easiest way to do this is to break it up into two pieces, because if you don't, chances are you're going to forget to reduce one of them. So let me just kind of give you a little bit of a reminder. Back in, I don't know, like 5th grade or something, you learned about fraction and you said, well, 3/7 plus 2/7, and you learned that you could just add the numbers on the top so that it became 5/7. Now you usually don't write this middle step, but that's really what's happening. You know that 3/7 plus 2/7 is 5/7. What we're going to do is we're going to take this, the two things added together over the 7 over one denominator, and we're going to turn it into two fractions. And so that's exactly what's going to be happening down here, is I'm going to rewrite it as 4 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 5 over 2. Now that simplifies it a little bit just because now the reducing is going to be a little bit easier. What I tend to see if people don't do this is they maybe cross out the 2's or something and just leave the 4, and they forget that the 4 should also be divided by the 2. So at this point we're just going to simplify. 4 divided by 2 is 2, plus or minus the 2 divided by 2 is 1, so it'll be plus or minus root 5. So there you go, there's the first one. Let's go ahead and look at one more really quick. So we're going to go a equals 4, b equals -4, and c equals -5. So we're going to go x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now the simplification again should be fairly easy. 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. I've got -4 times +4, which is -16. -16 times -5 is +80 over 2 times 4 is 8, which of course gives us x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 96 over 8. Now from this point we need to simplify the radical, and so we're going to try to do that. I know that 96 is 16 times 6, This is a perfect square. Now, if you don't know this, then you just break it up into the little pieces. Look at the other videos for simplifying the radicals if you need to. So this will become x equals 4 plus or minus, and then it'll be square root of 16 times 6, which is 4 root 6. So 4 plus or minus 4 root 6 over 8. From there, I'm going to separate it just because, like I say, that makes it easier. So plus or minus 4 root 6 over 8. So that leaves me with 1/2 plus or minus 1/2 root 6. All right, so that's fine. Just like this is your final answer. If you wanted to, you could also write it as x equals 1/2 plus or minus root 6 over 2. And some people like doing that as well because you divide the 4 and the 8 by 2, leaving a 2 on the bottom. So that's fine as well. Those two answers mean exactly the same thing. In fact, you could also write it as x equals 1 plus or minus the root 6 over 2. You could put it all back into one fraction if you really wanted to. So those are different ways that you can write the answer. All of those are simplified. They're simplified radicals. They're simplified fractions. And so that's as far as you can go. All right, so we are done. Ciao.